Let us start with today, where we are today, the world energy scene. First of all, echoing what Maria said, there is a major change today in the global energy system players. In other words, the job description of many players are changing. Countries which have been years and years energy importers are turning to be energy exporters, such as United States, such as Brazil, that I will come in a couple of minutes. And countries which have been and are major energy exporters are at the same time becoming major energy consumers, such as the Middle East countries. I will tell you in a minute how important they will be in the global energy demand picture. Another important change is that years and years in the energy community, we were discussing that the sources of energy is concentrated in a very few number of countries, and it is changing. There are, first of all, new oil and gas resources coming from different countries, widening the spectrum, and also renewable energies are coming very strongly as a new energy source and changing that picture as well. While these things are changing, some of the major challenges stay as they are. The first one is on the climate change. Last year, we have observed a good news. Again, as Maria said, energy efficiency. There is a major improvement there. And last year, global energy intensity, so in other terms, the energy efficiency improvement worldwide, improved by 1.5%, which is about 4 times higher than the annual average in the last 10 years. There's a major improvement there, mainly driven by North America, US, Canada, and the car efficiency policies, but also China and other countries as well as Europe. But despite that, CO2 emissions are on the rise, and as we will see in a couple of minutes, we are experiencing a significant increase in the risk of climate change. Subsidies, a major increase, especially driven by the Middle East countries, and this year our estimate is the subsidies, fossil fuel subsidies, reached about $544 billion last year, a significant increase over 2011. And an issue that we have been following since 10 years, or more than 10 years, some of you know, energy access. 1.3 billion people, it means every 5th person in the world, they have no access to electricity, mainly in sub-Saharan Africa, India, Pakistan, and Bangladesh. And the same, about 2.6 billion people use primitive sources of energy, if we can call it energy, such as agricultural waste, animal waste, and wood, in order to cook their food. And this has also major implications for the health and beyond that. So these challenges, 3 challenges, still are there despite the changing global energy pictures. Finally, one word on energy prices. We have seen in the last 3 years, oil prices average over $100. And we perceive it as a normal thing now, but it has never been the case in the history, such a long time, such high prices. Some of you may remember in the year 2008, when we released the World Energy Outlook here, when the oil prices were $30, we said the era of cheap oil is over. And this is what we are seeing, $100 oil prices 3 years in a row, with significant implications, we believe, on the economic recovery efforts of the oil importing countries. And again, as Maria mentioned, there are significant price differentials between the countries in terms of the natural gas prices and electricity prices with major implications on geopolitics of energy and the competitiveness of the countries. And we will discuss the second one in a minute. So when we look at the future, where does the demand come from? This is the consumption of OECD countries in 2035, and the share of OECD countries, US, Europe, Japan, Canada, and the others, in the global energy demand growth in the next 20 years is almost negligible, 4%. Their share in the global energy demand growth. The growth is mainly coming from Asia. About two-thirds of the global energy demand comes from Asia. But here, there is, again, a change within the change. When we talk about the global energy demand growth, we have been talking, all of us, about the role of China as the engine of the global energy demand growth. This will continue through 2020, but around 2020, India will be the engine of the global energy demand growth, is becoming the single largest growth energy demand center in the world. China slowing down and India picking up around 2020. So first China and then India as a result of several economic, demographic, and energy policy reasons. Then, of course, Middle East. As I said, Middle East is becoming an energy-consuming center. We expect, as a result of the economic growth, a huge push for petrochemicals and subsidized, very cheap energy prices. Middle East energy demand will grow very strongly, and around 2035, Middle East oil consumption in Middle East countries, their consumption will be about 10 million barrels per day, which is equal to the consumption of China of today. So the amount of oil consumed in China today, how important it is, we know, all of us, for the oil markets, Middle East will be consuming in the year 2035. And then, of course, you have Africa, Latin America, and other countries contributing to this growth. In terms of fuels, now there is an interesting number here coming from our analysis. We all talk about the decarbonization of our energy system. More renewables, more nuclear power and others, less fossil fuels. But what we see is that today, the share of fossil fuels in the global energy mix is 82%. And it was exactly 82% also 25 years ago. So 25 years ago, share of fossil fuels in the global energy mix was 82%, and today it is still, after 25 years of efforts, it is still 25%. And when we look at the future, we expect the renewables make a strong push as a result of government policies mainly, and also natural gas is growing very strongly. The growth we expect coming from natural gas is equal to the growth coming oil plus coal put together. So a very strong coming from natural gas. But the fossil fuels will still dominate the picture. So what does this mean for the climate change? We are definitely off track in terms of the CO2 emissions. Current trends show us an increase of the CO2 emissions, which is perfectly in line with a temperature increase around 3.6 degrees Celsius. And as we all know, 3.6 degrees Celsius temperature increase is far from you just take your jacket off. It's a major problem for the rather fragile equilibrium of our planet. And when we look at the source of the CO2 emissions growth, it is going more and more on the side of the non-OECD countries. There's a strong debate in the climate change community, who is responsible for what? So looking at the historical emissions, which is definitely fair, because the CO2 going to atmosphere 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 50 years ago, does also count. And the OECD countries, during the Industrial Revolution, put a lot of carbon in the atmosphere, so there is a responsibility there. However, it is changing. When we look at the last 100 years, plus the next 25 years, we see that the contribution of putting carbon in the atmosphere, OECD countries versus the non-OECD countries, becomes more or less equal. So when you look at the blue part of the picture here, which is the responsibility of OECD countries, versus the yellow part, which is the non-OECD countries, they put in the last 100 years plus the next 25 years, same amount of CO2 in the atmosphere. Of course, when you look at the per capita emissions point of view, still non-OECD countries emit less emissions than the OECD countries, but some of them are much more advanced in that respect. For example, Chinese per capita emissions are overtaking European per capita emissions around 2015. So that argument may not hold anymore. And of course, our aim is to limit the temperature increase 2 degrees Celsius. To be able to keep it there, we are allowed to burn certain amount of fossil fuels. If it goes beyond that, it will go beyond 2 degrees Celsius. And when we look at the last 100 years or so, we have already used about 2/3 of our allowance in terms of that budget. We have eaten up. And if we do not change our policies in line with our numbers, we are almost closing down the window of opportunity, and the remaining budget will be very, very small. Therefore, it is very important to act now in order to have this budget remain a bit higher. And as such, I think you may remember our executive director and myself released a report this June, an energy and climate map. There we have suggested 4 major policies, what the governments can do without harming the economic growth. And this will be of crucial importance if we are serious to keep the 2 degrees temperature target for us. Now, let me move to oil. This is the focus of this year's World Energy. We look at oil in depth. First, about the demand of oil. In the OECD countries, US, Europe, Japan, and the others, we expect a decline in the current demand levels as a result of the saturation effects, as a result of efficiency policies put in place. The growth is coming from China, India, and Middle East. These are the 3 major countries, and it is the driver of the global oil demand, and global oil demand reaches about 100 million barrels per day, 101 million barrels per day in 2035. Now, this is clear, but what are the sectors, which economic activity drives the oil demand growth? There are 2 of them. One of them is the transportation sector. When I say transportation sector, we automatically think of cars, which is wrong, or half wrong, half right. Trucks, the heavy freight vehicles play an increasingly more important role. Just to give you a number, about 1/3 of the global oil demand growth comes from the Asian trucks. 1/3. Why it is important to underline this? For 2 reasons. One, today the policymakers' attention for efficiency policies are almost exclusively concentrated on the efficiency of the cars. But the trucks are growing, and there are not major efficiency policies there. Second, why it is important, trucks? Because of the products they use. We will need more and more diesel in the future than gasoline. we expect the diesel demand will increase 3 times higher than the gasoline demand in the next years to come. Transport is the first driver of the oil demand growth. The second driver that we don't talk much is petrochemicals. Petrochemical sector is growing very strongly, mainly as a result of the growing need for plastics. We may not think in our daily life plastics is an important thing, but it is very important. Demand is growing for the packaging, the industrial goods, consumer goods, for the consumer, the iPhones, car manufacturing, water bottles. It is growing very strongly, especially in Middle East and in Asia. Therefore, lots of oil will be consumed there, in addition to transportation sector. So these are the drivers of the oil demand: transportation, within transportation, trucks, and also petrochemical sector. There is one element in the oil discussion, oil debate, we rarely see in the newspapers or in the debate, which is the refineries. We see the refinery news when there is a refinery closure, and we think that the refinery sector is going through difficult challenges. Why refinery sector is going through difficult challenges? There are at least 2 major reasons why it is the refinery sector worldwide, but especially in the OECD countries and especially in Europe, becomes a problem. The first one is, normally, what we used to know is that the crude oil is produced, it goes to the refineries, becomes a product, and it goes to the consumers, the cars and others. But what is happening is that more and more NGL, natural gas liquids, coming to the markets. They are going to increase substantially with the increase of natural gas as a byproduct in many cases. And this NGL doesn't need to go through the refineries. It can go directly to the consumers. They are very light. In many cases, it goes directly to the petrochemical sector. So you don't need refineries in that respect. So this is the first reason why the OECD refineries are facing a problem. Second, while we have already a significant existing capacity, spare capacity, not used, there are substantial amount of new capacity coming from China, India, and Middle East. New projects are coming. China and India are building substantial amount of new capacity in order to not to import products, but import crude and transform at home and sell the products to their domestic markets. In Middle East, many Middle East countries don't want to sell their crudes. They want to sell their products, and it is therefore they are building refineries. So this puts a major pressure on the refinery sector, and we think that there will be a substantial amount of spare capacity in the next years to come, and out of which about 10 million barrels per day of refineries through 2035 will be at risk of closure, mainly in Europe and in the OECD countries. Now about oil supply. Last year here, we gave you the news that the United States in 2017 will be the largest oil producer of the world. And our numbers this year reconfirm this trend, and even earlier, around 2015, we expect US to be the largest oil producer of the world. But this is the first chapter of a story that I wanted to bring to your attention, because there are quite a bit of a misperception understanding the US story. So when we look at the next 10 years, we see that the light tight oil, mainly coming from US, which can be nicknamed as the younger sister of the shale gas, the shale oil from United States, will increase significantly in the next 10 years or so. And also, unconventional oil coming from Canada and elsewhere will add to the increase. And also, we see an increase coming rather modest from Middle East. Brazil is making lots of efforts, deepwater offshore, I will come in a minute, and some other countries in the world we see a decline. This is for the next 10 years. Light tight oil is coming, especially from United States and other places. However, light tight oil or the shale oil from United States is a good news for United States, good news for the rest of the world, but we do not expect this trend will continue after 2020s. It will come to a plateau and then decline as a result of the limited resource base of light tight oil. And afterwards, we will need a substantial increase of Middle East oil in order to meet the growth in the oil demand. This is the second chapter of the story. And today, many people think that this revolution, shale oil revolution in the United States, which in fact I will call rather a surge rather than a revolution, will change the game. Then these colleagues do not need the second chapter, which is a very important part of the story, where we need the Middle East oil. Middle East oil is, as Maria mentioned, crucial to the global oil industry today and also tomorrow. But if we give the wrong signals to the Middle East producers that we do not need their oil, which people do in many cases, investments in that part of the world may not take place. And the appetite of those producers may get lost. And in order to see Middle East oil coming to market in 2020, new oil, we have to invest now. You have about 7 to 10 years of a project time for any project to see the light of the day. So therefore, we have to be very careful in understanding the role of US shale oil surge. This brings me to the next issue, which is the issue of Brazil. Every year, we focus on a country. Last year, you may remember, we looked at Iraq in depth, and this year, Brazil. We worked very closely with the Brazilian government, Brazilian oil industry, including Petrobras and other colleagues, but the numbers are our own. What we see is that one very good news for Brazil, and of course for the rest of the world, Brazil is becoming a net oil exporter around 2015. However, dear colleagues, this is not only as a result of the substantial increase we expect from the deep water offshore in Brazil. This is very good, this adds a lot, but this is also as a result of the Brazilian government's, since years, pursued biofuels policy, which replaces substantial amount of oil products. So demand is, oil demand is getting lower. As a result of that, Brazil becomes an oil exporter around 2015 and becomes a major producer worldwide after that. We expect Brazil will be the 6th largest producer of oil in the world, following Saudi Arabia, United States, Russia, Canada, and Iraq. So after that, Brazil comes as the 6th producer. And we also look at the Brazil's domestic markets as well. And what we see is that Brazil's domestic markets are driven by the renewable energies. An exemplary picture. Carbon footprint is very, very low, especially hydropower, but also biomass and others. But of course, when it comes to oil here, once again, in order for this picture to happen, a rather strong growth, which is a bit, I should say, more modest growth than the Brazilian government expects, this requires substantial amount of investments. The amount of investment which will go in Brazil oil sector is crucial. It is even higher than the all investments in all Middle East countries put together in terms of oil. And Petrobras will play a key role here. And the very issue that the companies have to use local manufacturing may well be a challenge for the implementing all these projects in the pipeline. Now, we are coming to the electricity markets. When we look at the electricity markets, we see that the significant amount of new power plants have to be built, and about 40% of the new power plants in the world will be built in China and India. And when it comes to the OECD countries, it is mainly, more than meeting the growth in the demand, mainly to replace the retired power plants. It is old. In the OECD countries, energy infrastructure is old. They are going to retire, especially the coal-fired power plants. Almost 2/3 of the coal power plants in the OECD world will retire within the next 20 years of time. On one hand, this is a challenge. On the other hand, it provides an opportunity. The challenge is to find investments, especially in OECD countries and, of course, others. To find the right investment is difficult. In Europe, for example, many major utilities are facing a challenge of very low electricity demand growth, and the push for renewable energies as a result of obligatory measures, and their portfolio is squeezed between them, and they are not able to make enough revenues in order to make the next investments. Renewable energies, we see a major increase in the renewable energies in the next 20 years, mainly driven by China. Renewable energy additions coming from China in terms of generation will be higher than the US plus Japan plus all European countries put together. And similarly, other developing countries add to that, and there will be a major expansion of renewable energies. In terms of the types of renewable energies, it will be hydropower, but also wind and solar. Still, in 2035, 50% of the renewable energies will be hydropower. And the major growth coming from the solar and wind will be driven by, among other things, substantial renewable subsidies put by the governments. We estimate in the World Energy Outlook that the renewable subsidies reached last year over 100 billion US dollar. And this is, in some cases, a major topic for debate for the governments, as many governments think that this puts pressure on their budget, and also it can put a burden on the electricity prices for the consumers. And this is, but in any case, we see an increase for renewable energies in the next years to come. From this, we are coming to the last part of our work, which is the competitiveness. We told you last year that the energy landscape is changing, and this has implications, and one of the implications on the competitiveness. We looked how the different price disparities between the regions would change the global economic geography. So, very simple. 10 years ago, when we look at the natural gas prices in the world, and the United States and the 3 other regions, they were more or less equal, 1 to 1, 1 to 1.1, 0.9 to 1. They were more or less equal, a very tranquil global gas markets. But after the shale gas revolution, today we see a major disparity between the United States and the rest of the world. In Japan, today, the natural gas prices are up to 5 times higher than the United States, and Europe 3 times higher than the United States. A huge difference, which never existed only a few years ago, until a few years ago. And this is a serious issue for Europe and Japan, but more serious it is that we expect that these price differentials may narrow a bit, but by and large will remain big. So it is not an issue of today. It will be a structural issue for these countries. And therefore, we think this will have implications for those countries' competitiveness. Another important aspect, as Maria mentioned, is the electricity prices. When we look at the electricity prices in 2003, the difference between the countries and vis-à-vis the United States was not very big, but we expect that the differences will be significant for many years to come as a result of A, natural gas as an input to electricity generation becoming more expensive. Second, in some countries, nuclear power, up and running nuclear power plants are shut down, and in some countries, renewable subsidies have an effect on the electricity prices. So there will be, the summary is, there will be, in the next 20 years, on the basis of the current policies, on the next 20 years, there will be a major price differentials in terms of natural gas and electricity prices between the United States vis-à-vis Europe and Japan, which has never been the case before, and this will have major implications. And we looked only one of those implications, namely, how does it affect the energy-intensive industries? We look at the petrochemical sector, iron, steel, paper and pulp, glass, cement, and others. When you look at the role of energy prices in the industry, it is important in some cases, less important in some cases, and very important in other cases. And for these sectors, it is very important because they constitute about 30 to 70% of the total manufacturing costs. Petrochemical, about 70%, for example. So therefore, the energy prices play a significant role. And when we look at the future of these sectors, exports in different countries, in the global markets, we see that the share of the US, China, and the other developing countries increase their share in the trade of energy-intensive products, such as petrochemicals, aluminum, iron, steel, and so on, whereas bad news for Europe and Japan, a significant decline in their share in the trade of energy-intensive products. And these sectors, ladies and gentlemen, are crucial. They make about 20% of the industrial value added globally, and more than 25% of the industrial employment. So the changes here, the implications here, may well have knock-on effect for the economies of these countries, and as such, they may well change the global economic geography. Our final word is about the gas market. Today, a major discussion in the energy circles is the gas price differentials and the position of the United States and Canada. Today, as I said, the gas prices in Asia is about $16, $17, whereas in the United States it is $3.5. There is a big difference. And in Europe it's about $11, and again, United States price about $3.5. So if we see more and more LNG coming to markets from North America, US mainly, but also from Canada, how and if it would change this price gap? We think, first of all, it is important to bring to your attention that in addition to the price differential, there is a very important thing. For example, if you want to send North American gas to Japan, you need about $6 of a price in order to liquefy it and ship it. So $6. It means it comes already $10, $11. So 3.5 is the price today in the United States and $6. There is still significant amount of margin there between the how much would it cost to bring it to the Asia and to the $16, $17 in Asia. And therefore, we think if there was a substantial amount of US Canadian gas come to the Asian markets, so around 100 BCM, as we have discussed in our book, this may well help to bring the Asian gas prices a few dollars, about $2 down. But the message is clear from us. One should not expect one single global gas price, whatever happens. As a result of the major cost of transportation and liquefaction, there will be always this price differential. To ship gas is a costly business, and therefore even United States and Canada would export 100 BCM, as we have in one of the cases analyzed in the World Energy Outlook. United States will be still a low-cost energy source country. So let us finish our work. As you see, many things are changing, and as Maria said, for the policymakers, it is very important to have an orientation in this fast-changing energy world. Therefore, we make this World Energy Outlook for the policymakers and the others. Some of the messages, if we can summarize. One, China, up to 2020, and afterwards, India will be the driver of the energy demand coming from Asia, and therefore the trade. International energy trade is moving from the Atlantic Basin to the Asia-Pacific Basin. Today, about 40% of the energy trade takes place in Asia-Pacific. Very soon, it will be 2/3 of the international energy trade will take place, oil trade will take place in Asia-Pacific region, with all its implications, from the pricing to the oil security issues. Technology is opening up new oil resources, which is a very good news. As I said, the shale oil is coming, other unconventional is coming, but we should not forget that the Middle East is and will remain the heart of global oil industry, with its rich and low-cost resource base for many years to come. We think the regional price gaps for natural gas and electricity will be with us for many years to come, and it is definitely going to impact the economies of the countries vis-à-vis each other worldwide and the global economic geography. But higher energy prices do not mean higher energy costs. If you push energy efficiency, bring the cost of energy down, it may be one of the ways to address the competitiveness disadvantage of those countries. Finally, we know that the world is still struggling through difficult economic times, but it is still very, very urgent that we have to find a low-carbon path to address the key challenge that we are facing today, which is the climate change. So with these words, I would like to finish, Greg.